Okay, hello and good morning from Elmhurst, Illinois. I think it's Monday. I'm losing track of the days due to this darn lockdown thing. Today, let's talk about preparedness and planning failures. On this one, I'm not so sure that the virus can be described as a planning failure. At a lot of different levels, yes, it could be described as a planning failure. Obviously, the feds weren't ready. The states were not ready. The counties were not ready. The towns, cities were not ready. And 300 million plus Americans were not ready. Okay, so what does that mean? All right, planning, contingency planning. As I alluded to in previous talks, you can plan for everything, but in terms of applying resources to the planning, that's extremely difficult. So say, for example, they wanted an N95 mask for everybody in the country in the event there is an emergency. So we're talking a population of something like 320, 350 million people. Therefore, you need 350 million masks. However, scientific error says that a percentage of those will be defective masks, so you have to cover for that. Okay, so let's say it's a 5% error rate. It's probably more like a 2% failure rate, but let's say you allow yourself 5%. So now you got an extra 15 million masks. Well, where do you put all the masks? Where do you store them? What is the life of the masks? I've mentioned how the Chicago cops, they got shafted because the emergency supplies just weren't there for the cops. Somebody found a warehouse that had hand sterilizing solution. That got all handed out, and then somebody at the police department, I guess they investigate? Some of these guys are called investigators, what? So somebody investigates the product code on the hand sanitizer they were given by the city of Chicago, and it hadn't been manufactured since 2009. It had a shelf life, I don't know, 3 to 5 years, something like that. So they the city of Chicago, abject failure in planning. Again, the incident at the airport on a Sunday night was 2-3 weeks ago. They had all the people fleeing Europe coming into the United States before we locked it down. The feds at the airport, Immigration Customs, they were not prepared because they hadn't thought about the planning. The city of Chicago people recognized the failure in implementation of the plan. However, the people at the city of Chicago were unable to change the event. And it would have been very easy. Come on, guys, you got all the keys over there. Open up another, terminal. Open up a storage room. Come on. All right, City of Elmhurst, Illinois. Planning in the city of Elmhurst. You had the civil defense going back to the World Wars. World War I, the Great War, saw the Elmhurst National Guard contingent, went to Europe, and their commanding officer was a guy named Walter Beadle Smith, who ended up being Dwight Eisenhower's, one of his key staff members. I believe he was chief of staff. So the Elmhurst contingent went over, and what did they learn from the Great War? It was a big deal, and a lot of people go around with clipboards and stuff. So when World War II started, the adults in town, the town fathers, they realized that there needed to be some level of preparedness. So they set up things like air raid wardens, and they went through some tabletop exercises in terms of what they can do, what they can't do. So they were ready for that. But when the bomb appeared, at first they thought, well, it's far away, it can never get us. And then they quickly realized that the Soviets had the range to get over here. So that's when we built those surface-to-air missile sites around the country, known as the Nikes. So Chicago area got about 12 of those Nike sites. They operated from the mid-50s to, mid-late 70s, and then they were all shut down. They were functionally obsolete. So somebody planned for a Russian attack. There they put the resources in. Whether or not the resources would have worked, that's a whole other question. All right, and now I'm heading down St. Charles Road. Took you down this way a few days ago. We're going to zip past the high school, York Community High School, class of 1980 rules. Yeah, so when I went to grade school, it was during the Cold War, junior high, Cold War, high school, Cold War. And as long as we're at the stop. There's the high school over there, and that big piece of school that's closest to us is what we call the big gym, or some people in my time referred to it as the new gym. There is a basement under that gym. The school authorities came up with a proper room name for it, and it's called the basement gym. However, sometime in the 1950s, civil defense in the area decided that the basement gym would be the perfect location for a 100-man emergency hospital. So there's the gym. It's been retrofitted since then. And there's a big basement. It's, I would say theoretically you could play football down there, but you know, I don't know. We're going to take a pause here, and I'm going to see what these folks are up to. Okay, totally cool. Totally cool. This is Elmhurst Community School District 205 is getting food out to those 18 and under who need it. There is some sort of criteria. Somebody pulled up a moment ago to get something. Totally cool. All right, let's switch gears back to the 100-man emergency hospital. So, the basement gym in the 1970s, it was a pit. I mean, York High School was a tough school to go to during the 70s because it was so overcrowded. My graduating class was above 700 people. My older sister's graduating class was something like 1,500. We went to school on shifts. Yeah, we had 5 different shifts. It was great because if I was late, I could just catch the next bus. We had 5 buses in the morning, 5 buses in the afternoon. Well, anyways, down there in the basement pit, the basement track, they had this giant closet, and in it was a 100-man emergency field hospital. I've seen video on this. What'll happen is you have a crew that comes in. I think it's 12 people who have not necessarily much training. They just need to be people who, you know, can work a hammer, work a screwdriver, that sort of thing. Can lift 30 pounds, something like that. With a dozen people, I think it's like 1 hour, 3 hours, something like that. They will have the hospital set up and running with the exception of the medicines and things like that. So they will have the beds, they will have the lighting, they will have exam tables, they will have partitions. They can get it up and running really quick. YouTube has a video of setting up the 100-man emergency field hospital. Now, over here at the corner of West and Surf, this is Ben Allison Park, and that's not the same hill that was there so many years ago. Elmhurst at one time built a bomb shelter, and it was located right here. This is kind of a goofy story because it's a lot of murk in the gray areas, and old CJ, a good friend of mine who hangs out with me and takes a lot of pictures and stuff, He got busted on this one. Front page of one of the papers, he was trying to tell everybody, hey, you know, City of Elmhurst, civil defense bunker. Well, here's what happened. The City of Elmhurst in the early 1960s decided to take an unused, above-ground, concrete water reservoir. It was a tank, round tank. It must have been about 30 foot in diameter, something like that. It wasn't very big, you know, like a garage. Think about a round garage, round two-car garage. They started building in this place. They had it set up, and at some point, I think what had happened is the creek flooded. And it's right next to the darn creek, and when Salt Creek flooded, it contaminated everything in there. All along, there had been people who had doubts as to whether a concrete bomb shelter was a good idea. And before they completed it, they shut it down. They decided they weren't going to construct it anymore. The emergency field hospital over at the high school, at some point, I think it must have been in the 80s, it was declared surplus and disposed of. Question, don't you think they should have held on to at least the cots? All right, now DuPage County out in Wheaton, they had a beautiful bomb shelter. They built a purpose-built bomb shelter. It was underneath the old county highway department. It was like reinforced concrete, 12 inches thick, all the way around with protected entrances, emergency generator, massive communication tower. It wasn't just a fallout shelter and communication node. They were expecting to take a near hit. And they figured that they would be able to control the county from down there. Now, I got to go in there. I'm interested in all this, Cold War history, and you can look at my playlist on the channel, and you'll see Cold War history. You'll also see the video about the bunker over there at the park, and you also see a bunch of stuff on the Nike sites. So Wheaton built this giant bunker. It was reinforced. It was mostly inactive. At some point, probably in the 60s, no, it must have been the 70s, all these towns were dispatching their police departments with their own departments. Somebody at the county level decided that it would be better and cheaper to have a central dispatch system, and DuPage Communications, DuCom, was born. So when you call 911 in the city of Elmhurst, your phone call does not go to the police station downtown. No, it does not go there. It goes to a big communication bunker out in the western part of the county. It had been in Bloomingdale, near Army Trail and Bloomingdale Roads, but they just built a whole new facility in the last year or so, and it's like Naperville or something. The old super bunker under the transportation building at the county, that got eliminated. They decided they didn't want to bother with it for whatever reason. I suspect it's real estate involved. They got rid of it, but they did replace it with another bunker somewhere else. I'm not sure where that is. But everything at the original super bunker was deactivated, and I don't know, it might be animal control or something now. It's something insane. People have no vision. So planning. What are the failures of planning? Well, again, like my old man, the Korea War veteran, and the landlord, the Korea War veteran, keeps saying, you can't plan for everything. Now, those guys got shafted because when they went into the service for the Korean War, the military had been planning for the big super Europe war. They thought the evil Ruskies were going to come pouring through the Fulda Gap in Germany and totally decimate and destroy our guys. So they were putting their planning and their preparation into Europe. They never thought the North Koreans would be able to launch an assault. They never thought that the Russians would back the North Koreans. They never thought the Shikons would back the North Koreans. So when North Korea heated up, and once the Korean War heated up in 1950, when the North poured across the border, the American troops there really weren't equipped for anything. Everything was light. It was rifles and maybe some cruise-served machine guns. I don't think there was any artillery over there. I don't think there were any tanks over there. Our bazookas were World War II era bazookas, which could not kill the North Korean World War II T-34 tanks, the Russian-built tanks. It was one of these cases where all our stuff had gone pretty much functionally obsolete, while the enemies had been slightly superior. The troops that were in Korea were really just there to be like a police force, a training force. They got slaughtered. General MacArthur had been in Japan, and MacArthur, you know, I really liked MacArthur in history, but the man had so much hubris. He got caught, I think it was 3 different times he got, had a sneak attack on him, and he didn't see it coming. Now, on the other hand, he was extremely into Oriental culture, courtesy of his father. He understood Asia, he understood Japan, he understood China. From that, he had a notion of what Korea was about. And once the attack happened, MacArthur went to classic tactics and strategy, and he knew that the North Koreans, while they were winning, they didn't necessarily have the logistic support they needed, nor did they have the training they needed. And MacArthur bet the rent money on an attack in the rear, which was the Pusan invasion outside of Seoul, where he cut the attacking forces off from behind, and the North Korean forces disintegrated and retreated. Going past the train station here. So here's the Army. These guys are professionals. They're supposed to be thinking on this stuff around the clock, and they missed the boat. And we got some construction going on here downtown. Probably the best time to do the construction. Downtown Elmhurst. So, City of Elmhurst, what type of planning have they done? Well, I've talked with some people in the planning chain of command, and I think they've done an excellent job for the most part. What it goes back to is the resources. Now, I'm sure somebody in Elmhurst said, you know, it would probably be a good idea if we had the hazmat suits for everybody in town, public works included, masks, and then the mayor and the aldermen and their family and their children and their cousins and their brother-in-laws, they all need masks. And then somebody started adding up all the pennies and nickels and stuff, and they said, you know something, we're going to be lucky if we can give the fire department and the paramedics the protective gear. You just don't have the resources to do that. You just don't have the money to do that. So coming up here in the downtown, I'm not going to say specifically where, but there are 2 reinforced basements, government controlled. They're set up with phone lines. They're set up with radios. They have their own radio masts. They have, at least one of them has a pretty decent generating system where not only have they figured that they would go off the grid for X number of days based upon the amount of diesel they have in the tank, but they're set up so that they can get alternative fuel brought in, and they've made that arrangement ahead of time, which is kind of cool. So anyways, getting back to the high school thing, you know, CJ's all over me with the sophomore year health series. Sophomore year in high schools, depending on who you are, it's not all that fun. When you got 5,000 people in a high school, you know, it's easy to get invisible. But there's some classes that just really stick out. In sophomore gym, they took one semester, split it in half. Half of the semester was driver's ed, which we in Elmhurst referred to as behind the book. You took all the tests. The tests were state certified, and once you passed the course, that made you eligible for your learner's permit. I can't remember if they were able to give us our learner's permit at the school or if we had to go somewhere else, to go to the state directly to get the learner's permit. But the other half of that sophomore gym class that semester was something they called health. Health was interesting. A good part of that was CPR training. And in those days, you were doing artificial respiration as well as doing the compressions on the chest. If you ever have a chance to go through first aid training or ever have the chance to learn CPR, I encourage you to do it. It is a blessed thing. So we spent a lot of time kissing the dummy Annie, and they had a big bottle of scope to wash out the mouth of Annie each time, which makes me wonder about health class over there right now. Are they still doing that with Annie, you know? Well, we want to maintain the social distancing, so only one person can be in the room at a time when you French the dummy. Yeah. Well, we're coming up to the best part, and this is what CJ's always going off on. We had films. We had lots of films. We had first aid films. However, all these first aid films were government made, United States government made, and they were all based upon being in a bunker. Being in a bunker. I kid you not. So I remember the one that was like breaking bones or wounds or something, and it seemed like they set up, you know, several scenarios, and the dialogue was great in these things, you know. It was like the narrator would tell you what's going on, and all right, you have determined that the person is injured. You have determined the injury. See your shelter manager. Your shelter manager will have supplies. And I mean, this shelter, the way they filmed it was like totally awesome. I think they went to a bad part of Los Angeles or New York or Chicago or something where everything was all wrecked and destroyed. And they really made it look like, you know, this was a warfare area. So there must have been 8 or 10 or 12 of these films. The final film in the series was emergency childbirth. Emergency childbirth in the bunker, in the bomb shelter, in the fallout shelter. I can't remember if we had to get like our parents to sign off on that or not. I think that was one of those things where you actually had to have a parent's signature to see the film. I think that happened to us in 4th or 5th grade, and then again in sophomore year. Well, anyways, whoever put these films together was able to manipulate or coerce or menace or get some poor pregnant woman to volunteer to give live birth on camera, probably 16 millimeter black and white film, and yep, they showed everything. We had at least one person that had to leave the classroom ill. I would say most of the guys snickered through the first 90 seconds, and then after that, the room got really quiet. The women in the class, the girls, they were all quietly going, oh my God, oh no, no, no. So, okay, birth is interesting. I got to see one real one in front of me in my life. I got to see the emergency childbirth movie. But you know something? Looking back at all of this, I'm left with this thought. And the thought is this: how exactly did they get that woman to go on camera? You know, was it the wife of the director? Was it the cameraman's wife or girlfriend? Did they find a street person? Hey, sweetheart, would you like to make a film? Oh, that's scary. Bensonville's going by with their fire department off camera. I'm at York and Grand, and they are going west on Grand. I have no idea what's going on over there. So we had this incredibly insane health class, and everything was based upon 1950s era civil defense planning. Somebody in the 40s or the 50s decided that, well, hell yeah, it would be a good idea if our citizenry was trained in emergency, whatever. And so they put the films together. However, the society grew well beyond the point of description for this emergency. The Cold War, very quickly they realized that there probably isn't going to be that level of resources. And quite frankly, a lot of people decided that nuclear war was unwinnable, and since it's unwinnable and it's going to result in the total destruction of everybody, why even bother planning? Okay, Bensonville Fire is returning very quickly, so they either got a false alarm or they were out to support somebody and they didn't need support. Okay, let's talk about dispatch for a second. This is something that fascinates me. Fire departments, emergency services learned the hard way that when you go to a large institution like a hospital, a school, a church, a giant warehouse or something like that, you get a fire alarm at one of those places. In the old days, they would send out the single company, you know, maybe a fire truck or two. And then when they got there, they would start radioing, okay, we need another pumper. Okay, let's make this a 2-alarm. And then maybe a little later, okay, let's make this a 3-alarm. Well, fire departments and governments just found out that that wasn't working. If they needed the resources, they need everybody there right from the get-go. So what happened is they changed around the thinking and the philosophy. And so if you have a alarm at, say, the high school, basically the fire department sends everything immediately. That way, if it is a real bona fide emergency, everybody is there. Most of the time, it's not an emergency, and the fire department, the chief on scene, they start sending people back. Okay, an evolution of planning. All right, so there's a big fire in the center of town, and you have both fire stations, all the equipment is being used, and then somebody's garage starts on fire over on the south end of town. So what happens? Does that mean you got no fire protection? Yeah, it's called mutual aid. If you're in a pretty much any urban area and your local department gets overwhelmed, somebody from the neighboring department's going to come out and they will take care of your emergency. In DuPage, it's evolved to the point where they just don't leave fire stations unoccupied. Quite often I have seen situations where the Elmhurst firefighters are busy, and then you have Lombard or Oakbrook will come over with their rig, and they will sit there in the driveway, and then they will take any other Elmhurst calls. Yes, they have left their own town, but in their own town they have resources still. They aren't occupied, they really aren't doing anything. Okay, police departments. Now let's talk about that. One of the dirty little secrets of police departments, and if you're a criminal here, you're going to want to pay close attention to this because this is interesting. There's never enough cops, right? Yeah, so what happened is the radio and the telephone, all that made police work fairly easy. But what happens with the police is you look at the total numbers, and I can't remember what we have in this town. It's like 75 or 85 sworn police officers. And that's a little detail you want to pay attention to. A sworn police officer, that means he is authorized to make arrests. He has the power of the town, the state, the law on his side, and he can make arrests. This isn't to be confused with other officers you'll see, community service officers, who wear the uniform, who wear the badge, who have a radio. However, they don't have the power of arrest. Those are the service officers. This is the dog catcher, the person who checks parking, and things like that. We have a lot of trainees who want to become sworn police officers, and then they'll become a service officer for a while. And service officers are great because it's a inexpensive way to get a vehicle out to an accident scene, and you can have them helping with traffic directing. You can have them help with the accident investigation, things like that. Incidentally, my channel does have a video on accident investigation. It's rather long. But again, there's a science that's been developed there. So, okay, so we have 75 or 85 sworn officers in town. I think we have another 6, 8, or 10 community officers. Shifts. Well, start dividing this up and you'll see something here. If you have 80 officers and you're going to have 3 shifts a day, and then your guys are working not 24/7, but the police work 24/7. How many policemen per shift? What about vacations? What about sick time? What about training? What about court? All right. So if you take those 80 police officers and you divide them into a shift per day, I can't remember what you get. It's probably like 8, maybe 10 officers on duty. On duty means that they're doing their work. If there's a car accident, a collision somewhere, well, those guys have to do paperwork. So that takes them out of the picture. If you have 2 car crashes in town and you got traffic direction and things like that, that uses up a lot of our resources. If you have a burglary investigation going on, that's going to be anywhere from 1 to 5 cops. Well, that means that 4 cops aren't available to check things out. Now, I don't know if it's changed from the old days, but 25 years ago, I used to listen to the scanner. It was something to do. And when I listened to the scanner, during thunderstorms, there was something amazing that happened. A lot of burglar alarms would activate, particularly at businesses, warehouses, commercial setups. So it would be like 9 o'clock on a Saturday or Sunday night. The thunderstorm goes through. You hear DUCOM contacting officers in Elmhurst, you know, Echo 8, respond to Grand Avenue for the burglar alarm, blah, 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 blah. And then it wouldn't be unusual to, half a minute after that, to hear the sergeant on duty get on the radio saying, disregard Echo 8, disregard. So what they do is they are betting that all these burglar alarms are going on because they're going off because of the thunder, the thunderstorm, voltage sways and stuff like that. So they're saying they're not going to waste resources on those incidents. Yeah, I get that. It's an excellent brain exercise here, and I don't think anybody's been hurt from that, or if any material's been stolen or anything. It just makes sense. It makes perfect sense. But see, those are the things that nobody really thinks about. Now, taking care of yourself and your family, and this is where it comes around full circle. You have to have knowledge at your fingertips. You need to be aware of the knowledge I've just told you. We have 2.5 ambulances in town. We have 2 ambulances that are staffed with 2 paramedics each. We also have our new ambulance, I believe they call it the ALS, that's a single paramedic. This was a cost measure. As much as we feel we could really use the 3rd ambulance here in the city of Elmhurst, they didn't have the funding. So they did say they will hire this other put on the 3rd ambulance. Okay, so why am I even bothering to mention this? Well, it goes back to resources. Let's say you have a 2-car collision at 83 and North Avenue. Emergency services gets called. Now that potentially means that one accident has just knocked out both of our ambulances. We do not have the ambulances, but mutual aid, right? Mutual aid. Well, with mutual aid, that means you will get an ambulance. So while our guys are working the accident up at North and 83, mutual aid is out there and they're watching our backs. And so if you're on the south end of town and you get, somebody in the family falls off the roof or has a heart attack or something, you're going to get an ambulance. They're going to come from Oak Brook, and maybe Oak Brook is sitting at Elmhurst Station number 2. But this is what I'm trying to impress you with. Every time you have that pebble getting dropped in the pond, the ripples go out. A ripple from a high energy emergency means that response gets delayed. So, CPR. Do you know how to do CPR? Mentioned this earlier. If your mom is having a heart attack and the ambulance is on its way, are you going to be confident that the ambulance is going to make it there in the average of 2 to 5 minutes? Or is it going to be during that one period of time when resources are completely used up? A couple weeks ago, City of Chicago, they ran a 20-minute delay on ambulances. They ran out of ambulances. There was some political problems with that. Somebody at the dispatch center called back to whoever was requesting an ambulance and there's no ambulances. We have no ambulances available. There's no ambulances. So instead of the chiefs fixing the ambulance problem, instead of the politic people fixing the ambulance problem, what do? They tell the Office of Emergency Services, don't ever say that on the radio again. Doesn't matter if there's no ambulances. Don't announce it. Don't make that public. Knowledge. Knowledge in your head, knowledge at your fingertips. You need to have knowledge if you truly wish to save your family's life. You can't plan for everything. I'm not telling you to become a doctor, but I'm telling you that a basic first aid class is an incredibly good thing to have, and knowing how to set a bone, make an improvised stretcher, a Heimlich maneuver to get something out of somebody's throat. You know, knowing how to do that stuff is a good thing. And teach the kids too. All right, have you ever heard those stories of the 3-year-old calling 911, stuff like that? Very good thing. Somebody had to teach them to do that. Well, teach those little kids that if somebody's bleeding, well, stop the bleeding. If somebody's not breathing, tell somebody. It starts at every level. It's respect for the other person when you care for them. All right, I got to wrap this thing up. I've been talking way too long. So you can plan, you can prepare for everything, and then you're going to find out that you did nothing. I can't remember if I told you the thermometer story yet. This happened to me yesterday. So this is my big personal failure in planning thermometers. Who would have thought? Well, me, I was way overconfident because I had an electric thermometer, one of those little battery thingies, and I had 4 glass bulb mercury thermometers. This is what happened. Went to use the electronic one because it's the easiest one to use. Battery was dead. Trip to the hardware store, get batteries. Bought 2, and wouldn't you know, I ended up getting the wrong sizes. So I made another trip back. Fortunately, this place had a sizing thing for the tiny little battery. Bought a new battery. I was able to bring the instrument back to life. It got 2 readings off me as a test, and then it fried itself out and died. Heh. All right. Then I take a glass bulb thermometer, and it just doesn't work at all. There's like, the mercury doesn't want to come up out of the base. Then I found another thermometer. Once you know, it's Celsius. Yeah, you know, it's like, how do you read that? You know, it's like taking a temperature with a Kelvin thermometer. It's almost worthless. Well, it did have the little arrow on it where normal is, but that one, the mercury didn't work either. Okay. Then I found a good one, and that's the one we've been using for the landlord. Yesterday I find one more thermometer. I'm like, oh, cool, we'll have a backup now. So I go to take my temperature. You know, I sanitize and everything. I'm like, okay, might as well check it out, and I'll take my own temperature. So rub it down with the alcohol, flick it with my wrist and everything, put it in the mouth, let it sit there for 2 minutes under the tongue, pull it out. 102 degrees. I'm like, what? So I go to shake it. 102 degrees. I put it in my beverage. Cold drink, cold water. It stayed 102 degrees. I put it on the shelf with the TVs. Came back 20 minutes later. 102 degrees. Well, yeah, planning failure. You know, I had alcohol, I had peroxide, I had a very, very limited amount of bandages. I had some stuff I could make splints with, but I never thought about fever. I never thought about the science of getting a reading on that. So, you can plan, but there's no guarantee that the planning will work. There's an Eisenhower quote out there somewhere about how planning is everything, but once the emergency starts, the plan evaporates. The idea of planning is it opens your eyes up to the imponderables, and later on, if you don't have the materials, the resources, the planning may have given you the insight to create alternatives. All right, I'm going to leave you with that. I'm in the Berkeley metropolitan area. You guys stay safe. Make sure you check my